Welcome to the second episode of Phoenix Meets, and I'm delighted to be joined by B9 CEO and Belfast Climate Commissioner, Mr. David Surplus, OBE. Good morning, David. Thank you for joining us. And I always find it difficult when I was coming to meet you this morning to place a title on what you do. You kickstarted your career in the marine industry. You then diverted your attention to the renewable industry and spent some time there, and indeed are still in it. And you're an entrepreneur. But I think that the glue that links all these pieces together is the fact that you're somebody who cares very passionately about climate change. And I know in previous engagements you've considered yourself to be somebody who wants to be part of the solution to climate change. Where do you think your expertise sits across those range of different skills?
I'm a marine engineer. My degree was to do with ships' engines, and I joined Lloyd's Register in London looking at, first of all, marine, but they shifted me into the oil and gas sector, and I worked in the North Sea for 6 years doing hookup and commissioning of new gas platforms. So I actually do hail from the oil and gas sector. It was about 1988 or so when Margaret Thatcher stood up in front of the Royal Society and said that we have unwittingly begun a massive uncontrolled experiment with the Earth's atmosphere. That was talking about climate change, and I thought, here am I in the oil industry, I need to jump across. So, and that's what I did. I joined the various groups looking at renewable energy, and wind was the one that was most likely to be commercially viable first. And so I got into the wind industry for Lloyd's, and then later formed the B9 group of companies in Northern Ireland here to develop wind farms both onshore and offshore, to develop anaerobic digestion where you can convert waste into biogas, and of late now we've been focusing on energy storage to try and make sure that we can go 100% towards wind and solar. So
some of that work that you refer to that has been done over the last 20-25 years in Northern Ireland from a renewable perspective, you've had a great deal of success with. That success, does that give you enthusiasm that actually Northern Ireland can now rise to the new challenge of ramping that up a gear and moving to a low carbon, net carbon zero society and the timescales that we hear often referred to?
Yes, absolutely, because all the while we were doing the formative work for the last 30 years on these technologies, we were in competition with oil and gas, with the nuclear industry, and with everybody else. And there's a lot of people who weren't that keen on what we were doing. And I think now, with everyone realizing that now we have to do this, and we only have about 9 years left, that once they come round to be on our side, then it's going to be a lot easier to make significant progress.
And in this morning's chat, I'm really keen to focus on the role of hydrogen in Northern Ireland. And as we know that hydrogen is recognised now across Europe as being a real key enabler for decarbonisation. But when we look at Northern Ireland's landscape specifically, why and what attributes of hydrogen lend itself particularly well for Northern Ireland?
Well, it's a problem that's come along because of our success. Northern Ireland's a very windy place with a very small population. And so we've got very high penetrations of wind power on our system now. It's as high as 70%, which is the highest in the world. There's no other grid in the world that has as much wind energy on it as Northern Ireland when it's windy. But the problem then is if that happens at night time when everyone's in bed and the factories aren't working, then there's no load to balance the generation. And so the system operator, who has to keep these things in balance all the time, switches the wind turbines off, and that's called curtailment. And that's now running 2020 at 14.8% of the energy that we could have generated, clean renewable energy, was not. And that has undermined the confidence of the wind farm investors, because it's the difference between profit and loss on a project. So now What we have to do is find ways of putting load on the grid in order to keep the turbines running. And the immediate thing you think of is batteries, and fine, there is a role, but they only last for an hour or maybe 2 hours, and then they're fully charged. Whereas a high wind event can go on for 10 hours all night long. And we've spent 8 years now looking at the various technologies that could be deployed for that very purpose, and the best one by far is electrolysis of water to make hydrogen with machines that are called electrolyzers. And so now our whole business plan is around, well, how do we get a gigawatt, 1,000 megawatts of these things installed by 2030? And when we look at that, if the hydrogen produced is going to things like the buses from Wrightbus, we know these are really good machines now. It's a good market for hydrogen. The problem is it's a small quantity. It doesn't allow us to put the balancing load in at sufficient scale. And so it's not going to be what we have to rely on. And the answer really is what's called power to gas, where we would take this extra wind power that's not needed, convert it into hydrogen, but go into the natural gas networks with that to blend the hydrogen into the methane gas which is in the pipes. Some people call that high-vane. We've got very modern networks here, and I think that it's an excellent place to be doing it, and it gives us the scale that we're looking for.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about the modern gas network locally. I was talking to a Great Britain counterpart recently, and obviously they're very, very keen on the hydrogen model too, but they have a challenge in terms of replacing old metallic network. And obviously with the introduction of natural gas back in the mid-90s, one benefit of coming slightly late to the party was this new modern network. So you do see that as a real opportunity for Northern Ireland really to spring forward a little bit earlier perhaps than other regions. Would that be fair?
Yes, it absolutely is fair, and we should whatever trump cards we are holding, we should be playing them. You're right, there's absolutely no problems with the steel pipes that they had in GB. It's hydrogen embrittlement is the issue there, and we don't have that issue in our distribution networks. We would really now be sitting on our hands for a few years waiting for GB to solve its problems before we would then do things at the same time as them. We don't need to wait, we can go sooner than that, really.
So in terms of that sounds very exciting. We've got an indigenous resource in wind. We've got a network that's capable of introducing hydrogen blends and 100% hydrogen ultimately in the future. Are there any networks across Europe at the minute that are doing this from a hydrogen blend perspective? Actually, we know that this is going to be a transition. We want to start by getting hydrogen into the gas network in some capacity. Is that being done anywhere?
Yes, well, of course, hydrogen is a gas which is used in industrial processes. It makes ammonia, for instance, for fertilizers. It makes methanol for plastic synthesis. It's a commodity that's well used, and places like the Ruhrgebiet in Germany, they have hydrogen pipelines with 100% hydrogen in the pipeline. I mean, there's thousands of miles of it in America. So the end game of having 100% hydrogen in pipes is already there, and that's not a problem. I've been looking closely at what happened in France, where they decided that there was no technical reason why 6% by volume of hydrogen shouldn't be blended into their natural gas networks. And they went ahead and did that. And then they did the sort of heavier work to be getting to the point where a 20% blend would be accepted. And our own projects in GB, the High Deploy project, has concluded now, and the HSE has signed it off, that a 20% volumetric blend is safe and people wouldn't need to change their appliances. Now, there are a whole stream of things we have to do to confirm that in every case, but the precedents are there, and we should be emboldened by that, and have some confidence in what we're doing isn't that different. Now, there has again been blends of hydrogen before too, with the the old town gas from the gasworks across here, which was 50 to 60% hydrogen. We used that for years. So again, the precedents have been there historically, and we just need to do all the work associated with giving ourselves that confidence. And the problem is we haven't got much time to do that. If we wait for 3 years now, we'll look back in 10 years' time and say, look at that, we should have gone much earlier. Look at the years we wasted there.
And in terms of, I know we've spoke recently about a project that you're working with Northern Ireland Water on, and I think this is the fascinating aspect of this subject, that whilst the production of hydrogen through electrolysis is clearly a sought after commodity, it's not quite the hydrogen that interests the likes of Northern Ireland Water at this stage. It's more the other byproduct, oxygen. Is that right?
Yes, and when you take water and you split it into hydrogen and oxygen using electric current in an electrolyzer, then for every ton of hydrogen you produce, you actually produce 8 tons of oxygen. That's the chemistry. So in a mass balance, these are oxygen projects. But yes, the wastewater treatment plants in Northern Ireland are at full capacity. They're constrained now, and by some work that we're doing in the way of a pilot project is to try and introduce oxygen into the secondary wastewater treatment process so that the aerobic bacteria speed up, do their job a bit better, and you can create some capacity so that then you can go ahead and build more buildings and things like that. That's fine, because any money that the project would get from selling oxygen is money we don't have to burden the hydrogen price with. So, and again, we'll be selling heat too. And the grid services, the balancing load, the fast frequency response, the capacity market plays are all things that add slithers of revenue to a revenue stack, so that
help the commercials overall.
If you tried to do any one of those, it wouldn't succeed. But if you do them all as a joined up project, then you can get across the line.
So David, we've talked about the availability of hydrogen, but obviously we have a energy landscape in Northern Ireland where we have people using natural gas at the minute. So from a consumer perspective, how does that transition take place from going from a system that uses natural gas to one that increasingly uses a hydrogen blend?
Well, up to this 20% volumetric limit, the appliances are good to go. They would need no amendment whatsoever. In fact, there's a European directive from 1995. All appliances sold for the gas consumption need to be tolerant of 23% hydrogen. So that's in place. And because our networks here have all come forward since then, all of our appliances would be certified for 23% today. Now, of course, we want to go towards 100%. And to get there, then, we would just be reversing the process that took place in the 1970s when we converted from town gas over to natural gas.
And I understand that there's lead boiler manufacturers in UK, Worcester Bosch, Baxi, who are on with that. They have developed fairly advanced prototypes of hydrogen-ready boilers that they anticipate being ready for the marketplace very soon. Now, I know that Phoenix would be very, very keen to see those type of boilers mandated, so that when people invest in a new boiler, they're future-proofing that move to 100% hydrogen. Would you support that view?
Absolutely. You would buy a boiler like that now. It would run on 100% natural gas. But then whenever the blends start coming through and ramping up to including 100%, you just turn a dial. I don't exactly know. There's something they would adjust, and then you're always going to be compliant. So the one investment would save you all the way through that.
Which is interesting, because actually a lot of the success that has been enjoyed in Northern Ireland to date from a renewable perspective, it has been very much industry-led and industry-focused, and therefore our next tranche towards decarbonisation is going to increasingly impact upon consumers, and therefore having those options that impact consumers least is clearly very, very important.
Yes, and you know, we will need all of the technologies that are available. I mean, there's a drive towards electrify heat with heat pumps and various other apparatus, and that's all good, and we need all that. But on its own, it won't be sufficient. The amount of energy we consume from fossil fuels now is so huge. Petrol and diesel in cars, heating oils for oil boilers, and then the natural gas network too, is such a massive amount of carbon emissions. We've got to get right into that and decarbonise it. So the oil boilers need to go, and they need to come onto the gas networks if the gas network is there, and then the gas needs to decarbonise. I mean, that's a very clear pathway.
I think there'll be a lot of excitement across many industries, but particularly the gas industry that employs around 2,500 people through the supply chain of installation companies, training centres, merchants, manufacturers. And I see a real opportunity that a lot of that skills would come from the upskilling of the existing resource we have. I'm going to end on maybe a rather unfair question, but really to tap into clearly the vision that you have described in our chat this morning, and really to ask the two key enablers for bringing some of that ambition to now through to the streets and to the homes and to the businesses in Northern Ireland. What two things, if you could pick through quite quickly, would be the key enabler for progress in this regard?
Well, I think an early start is what we need. We need to get going. We know the whole roadmap really, but we need to get going quickly. And I think allowing our 6% volumetric hydrogen blend into the networks in advance of the 20% would be a big start. They did that in France. We should drill into how they managed to justify that in France and satisfy ourselves that we are no worse than that here, and implement it, in my view. And secondly, when we're talking about hydrogen, it's important that this is green hydrogen or blue hydrogen, where the carbon dioxide is safely sequestered. They're both equally environmentally friendly. But I think that in green hydrogen, we need to use green electricity when we are feeding the grid, feeding the electrolyser. And when you take power off the grid, the authorities aren't allowing us to claim that that is 100% renewable energy. But the method that we'll be deploying the electrolysers is that we'll only put them on the grid when there's too much wind. And in that case, we would like to be able to raise a certificate of renewable origin from grid-sourced electricity. It's a bit technical, but it's important, because if we have a certificate of renewable origin, we can show that it's green hydrogen, and then we get access to the support mechanisms that there are. They're already in place, the renewable transport fuel obligation. You need your certificate of origin for that. In the future, the gas industry will be incentivized to go green using contracts for difference. And again, to be eligible to bid into the auction rounds for selling the produced gas into that system will require some sort of certificate of origin. So that's another ask.
David, it's been a real pleasure to meet this morning. I think whenever you look at the ambition in the Department for Economy's options paper and see statements like Northern Ireland has a unique ability to be a leader in industries like hydrogen, it can't but fill you with excitement. And I think that as you've scratched beneath the surface of some of the realities of that and some of the very real opportunities that exist in Northern Ireland, I think we've got lots to look forward to in the coming months and years ahead. So thank you for talking us through that detail this morning.